Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're going to talk about what is happening in the U.S. and in my great hometown where I grew up and was born in New York City. We have been seeing President Trump, former President Trump, on trial, convicted in a New York City courthouse. We've seen massive unrest in New York in terms of crime and violent crime, drug addicts and homeless people on the streets. The subway is become very dangerous, and basically a lot of New Yorkers have been leaving New York. And it seems to me that the New York City and what has happened to New York City over the past decade is sort of a microcosm of what's happening all over America's blue cities. And the question is why? And the question is how much of this type of policy will affect the coming election, and how much President Biden's support of these actions, how much will impact the coming election, and also how much does President Biden's ability to think right, his composure, his perceived or not perceived fragility and elderliness will impact the coming election. And so for that, we will be talking with Michael Goodwin, who is a senior columnist at the New York Post, numerous years at the New York Times, and someone who we've read in the past as native New Yorkers for many, many years. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. Michael Goodwin, it's a pleasure having you today on the Western Spirit, and it's it's an honor to speak with you.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Ariel.
So I wanted to say, first of all, that I grew up in New York, and the New York Post is our home paper for many, many years. And I've read you for, I think, ever since you've been there. And I wanted to ask you first and foremost about the American media. You have a history of being in the New York Times for many years. And we see how, I think it was always liberal with a liberal bent, but I think now they're really gone crazy, a lot of these outlets. How do you explain what has happened in the last, I would say, decade or even less?
Right. I think that in many ways, the media is both a leader and a follower of the culture. And so if you think about New York just alone, for example, we had a mix of mayors and governors, both parties, up until recently. And that recently period, I think, coincides with the Trump era. And a lot of what we're seeing today is a reaction to Donald Trump's election in 2016. And so, for example, in 2018, the Democrats took over the state Senate, not just any Democrats, but radical far left Democrats in the mold of AOC and Jamal Bowman. They took over the state Senate. The Democrats had held the assembly for many, many years, but the Republicans had always held the Senate and were able to continue working with some Democrats to hold a majority. But in 2018, that was ended dramatically as the progressive wing of the Democratic Party defeated 8 more moderate Democrats who have been working with Republicans. Okay. And so you had a real flip in the power of the left. And that, meanwhile, New York City had elected Bill de Blasio mayor in 2013 after the 20-year run of Rudy Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg. De Blasio in the beginning was a more leftist mayor than New York was used to, but not in a crazy way. He kept, for example, he brought Bill Bratton back as his police commissioner for the first 2 years. But it's after that, it's in 2016, 2017, and then 2018, the culmination, where the city and the state both went so hard and far left that we're still trying to climb out of that. But we're in a deep hole. And a lot of the problems you see in New York today is owing to that far left Democratic takeover of government. And then the media has, except for the New York Post, has followed along, has essentially been the echo chamber for that progressive takeover.
Do you think that in New York is like sort of a microcosm of the entire U.S. in terms of today we're really reading about the Washington Post firing
Yes.
like a very large amount. They say they're bleeding tens of millions of dollars every quarter. They had this meeting where the employees, the journalists, were angry that the people that they brought to try to fix it were white men. Instead of saying maybe the reason why we should think about that it hasn't worked until now, no, they're angry that there was white men that came in. So do you think that what you're talking about, the New York Times, what happened locally in New York, is something that we could take out in terms of all the blue cities and states in America?
I do believe there is a model that they are all following.
Yeah,
And as much as I hate to see any journalist anywhere lose a job, because I do believe fundamentally journalism is important to democracy. But on the other hand, the Washington Post has become a parody of journalism. And so I think that any change there almost by definition has to be for the better.
yeah. Michael, I want to ask you about what we've been seeing from afar here in Israel about what's happening, let's say in New York and Columbia and in NYU, and Columbia got a lot of attention. I interviewed Larry Summers, who was he's former Treasury Secretary of Bill Clinton and the former president of Harvard. I think he was the first
Sure.
Jewish president at Harvard. And he said that he understands now, he didn't understand then, but now he understands it was always there. He says, looking back now, I understand, which I give him credit for at least admitting it. But I guess my question is, why did it take so long for some Jewish donors to, I don't know, hold back a little bit on the money? We've seen Bill Ackman in Columbia. We saw Kraft, I think, pull back on the money. But still, a lot of them are continuing to give money as alumni to these universities that have billions of dollars in endowments. Why is it so hard to say if you hate Jews, and for example, and I'm a Jew, I'm not going to give you money?
Yeah, it is something of a mystery. I'm not Jewish, honorary.
Yeah.
I've been deemed honorary. But speaking to a lot of my friends, I mean, they are horrified and shocked that there's so much anti-Semitism, particularly among this new generation, the college-age generation and thereabouts, and they're horrified
Yeah.
by their own sense of comfort that America was safe, America was a safe place, has been shattered for a lot of them, and it's tragic to see. And so you're right that many people sort of held out, and I think that it's understandable in the sense that they held out hope, right? They believe that Jews were integrated enough into American culture and society that what had happened elsewhere would not happen here, and it still hasn't happened here.
Right.
To the extent. I mean, we shouldn't, I think, overstate what has happened. It's awful, it's ugly, but I think it's fixable, and I think we should count this as an early alarm that we cannot continue in this way. And as others have pointed out, Eric Cohen at Tikva gave a very interesting address on this, that the decline of the Jewish population, say of the Ivies and the Ivy-like schools, didn't just begin. I mean, it's been going on now for probably 2 decades or so, where there was harder and harder to get into the Ivies as they ramped up their affirmative action and their DEI. I mean, the Ivies are so peculiar in many ways, because they're really small schools relatively, say maybe a couple of thousand students per class. And they try to they think of themselves as these global ambassadors. And so they want to have at least 1 or 2 kids from every of the 50 states, each of the 50. And of course, they want as many foreign students. Generally, they've had a quota of 10% foreign students. And those foreign students pay full tuition. So you get the princelings of the autocrats is really a lot of what you're getting in these schools. And yet it now has been revealed that all this discrimination ultimately hit Jewish applicants
and Asians.
And Asians, right. Don't you love it that Asians are white adjacent? That is what the left says of them, right?
Yeah.
They're so close to evil. They're not evil, but they're close to evil.
Yeah.
And so this prejudice against whites, against Jews, against Asians, it's pernicious in the worst possible ways. And I think now people have been alerted to it. I'm a graduate of Columbia. I actually taught at the journalism school there for a period, but I am not proud now, and I am ashamed of what's gone on there, and I am actually encouraged by the donors who say no more. That's it. I think that's the right response. I think it's only the beginning, but I do believe it begins to get attention to these presidents and boards of trustees who are ultimately responsible for this flawed academic approach that stressed race and ethnicity over merit. I mean, I think fundamentally that's where they went off track, and hopefully this will be a wake-up call to get back on track, at least to stop the decline.
But when you were at Columbia, I just want to I didn't know you were at Columbia, so it's interesting to ask. Did you remember, were there any classes that you took where they were teaching you this kind of stuff? Because it seems to me like saying basically that if you're white, you're evil, that if you're that the whole world is basically oppressed or oppressor, and that there's no nuance, there's no like complexity to anything. And it seems to be the whole point of going to college, to university, is to learn the complexities of life, to learn how to study, how to understand different details. And all they're teaching them, it seems to me, is that there's good and evil, and the good is always whoever's not white or whoever is not strong, and it just seems, I'm just curious if you remember any of these types of things being taught in your age.
Zero. Now, if you can't tell from my face, I'm a good bit older than this generation. But when I went there, it was very rigorous. I mean, I still have some of my textbooks, the contemporary civilization. I mean, the study of history, the great authors. I was an English major, and we read all the great authors throughout history. Most of them happened to be white men. Yeah. And there were some women, of course, too. But that was the nature of the great education systems. And it had served the world well. I mean, not just the so-called white world, but the entire world, I think, had benefited from the liberal education that the Western academies provided. It was a stabilizing force. It was a force that was based on morality, not perfect, of course, but based on the intellect, based on the Enlightenment. I mean, all of these things that drove this academic rigor have been dissipated now because it's all about groupthink. You know, it's like we have to have an African American studies to make the Black students feel good. I mean, my wife had been an academic for many years, a college president, and she talked about a lot of kids who took religion classes to get thinking that it was more like a Sunday school, that it wasn't the study of religion, it was the proposition of religion, the propagation of religion. That's what they thought the college classes should be. That turns academic ideas on their head. Yeah. But that is now, and then of course you've got the faculty, all too willing to engage in this propaganda. I mean, the closest thing I can remember to propaganda is I was a student during the Vietnam War. And that, of course, was a very tumultuous period in college campuses, particularly Columbia. And I remember a professor, a really good professor, saying, talking to the class about the Vietnam War. And I remember one of my classmates saying something like, well, the people who are opposed to it don't say what we should do if we end the war. What should we do next? And the professor looked at him and said, well, do we have to fight somebody else? And that was the closest it ever came that, we don't need to have war. We could just have peace. But that's minimal. That's nothing. That was just a smart response to a fairly dumb question. But that was the limit. I mean, these were serious courses that we all had to take.
And Michael, one thing that I find funny is that when the university presidents went in front of Congress and they basically said, we could call for the genocide of Jews or something to that extent because it's free speech, basically. And I was thinking that I have friends who went to campus to talk, and they were basically shut down in numerous campuses to give speeches. The university students protested outside. The university said, we can't protect you, so you have to move out of the campus. So I just think, like, if it's not across the board and you're letting some speech be told, even though on a freedom of speech, as a freedom of speech issue, and on the other speech you're being against it, it's very weird in the way they, it's the speech I like, that it's freedom of speech. Yeah.
That was I think one of the low points and one of the most revealing moments of his testimonies. I mean, Harvard, for example, I think scores a 0 on the free speech index from one of the rating groups. If you're going to have free speech, it's got to be free equally. It can't just be free to the one that you either you like or the student body likes. I mean, as many have said, college should be a time of some discomfort. You should be challenged. It shouldn't just be to applaud your views or indoctrinate you in a view and then support you of that. You should be challenged by hearing opposing views. That colleges have gotten away with that, to me, is the fundamental issue here. That they have stopped requiring a fair exchange of ideas, that academic rigor include diving into it's like a debate, right? When you are forced to take the side you don't really agree with, right? But that's how you learn how to debate. And all that's missing now at some of these so-called elite schools.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about how this relates to politics. We have the president of the United States. It took him a long time to even say something against the actual violence that was happening on these encampments in the universities.
Right.
And when he said that, he never said that he was against the principle of the protest. He just said, if you're breaking the law, I'm against it. You have a right to say what you want and this and that. But the president should be, I think, a normal president should say, you have the right to say what you want, but what you're saying is evil, right? What you're saying is evil, that the Jews should go back to Poland or stuff like that, right, or that Israel is apartheid or that genocide. All these stuff is wrong. But he refused to say that numerous times, and he only was against the violence, which I think is like, it should be obvious that we're against violence, even your own, So my question is, why does he feel the need to do that? And number two, do you think that these progressives in his party, the crazies, like I like to call them, are actually making a lot of the decisions for him in terms of the policy towards Israel?
Well, let me start with that part, because I do believe you've touched on something that is not clear yet. And that is what's really going on in the White House. Who's making these decisions? Who's crafting the talking points, the speeches, etc.? Because it's all over the place, right? It changes one day to the next, and it fits in with this larger narrative that Joe Biden is so addled that he's not really the president. I'm not sure I subscribe to that statement entirely. But I do believe that his mental and physical frailties, which are so obvious and which continue to grow worse, it seems, have created a space for others to inject and to be more demanding that their views be heard. And with a president who's declining, I mean, we can all imagine this. There are a lot of things that he's not paying attention to, that he's too tired or he's just having a moment. And so things are being done in his name. I'm not trying to defend him. I think he's unfit to be president. I would never have voted for him to be president. I think he's a terrible president. So I feel vindicated in that sense. But there is a lot of guessing about who's making the decisions, who's making appointments, right? I mean, you look at, most people will tell you that Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, are the worst two people we've had in those positions in decades, if not a century. I mean, they are both.
The world's on fire.
Yes, yes. And they walk around acting as if they got it all control. I mean, the most infamous incident, of course, is Sullivan's interview with the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, where he wrote a piece that, the Mideast has never been quieter in decades, right? There was 3 days before October 7th or something.
Yeah.
They had to go back and rewrite but that was their arrogance, that they thought everything was going well because there was no shooting wars. I mean, that's a pretty low barometer for testing yourself, measuring yourself. So I think that the question of Joe Biden is also a question about his staff. I mean, the domestic policies are a mess. The energy policies. I mean, Pete Buttigieg with, making all these pronouncements about electric, and they've got a budget of something like $7 billion to build this charging infrastructure, and they built 7 chargers so far. I mean, it's things like this. Planes are falling out of the sky. Railroad accidents are up. Where is the Secretary of Transportation? What does he know about transportation? He was a mayor of a small Midwestern town, really. Yeah. But he fit all the DEI requirements. And so there he is. So there's just, it's not a strong administration, not strong at the top, not strong in the leaders of the cabinet. I once heard, someone once said to me that a saying from business school is that A people hire other A people, B people hire C people. And so that's what I think we have in the
But Michael,
Biden White House.
We do see that in the when October 7 happened. I remember President Biden came here, and I think it was like 3-4 days after, he was hugging everyone.
It was 11 days. It was
11 days. But like in the first, we were pretty much in shock. My father came for a visit, and he came for the action, so to speak. And it was a big shock. And we, all the missiles, and people have numerous friends who passed away, and it was crazy. And then the president came, and he basically, I pretty much agree with you on everything, but it was nice that the president he said he's behind us all the way. And take that president and take the president we have today. It's two different people. Like, right. We have decisions in the UN. We have embargoes on weapons. The president himself threatening Israel. The president in Time magazine 2 days ago saying that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for political gain. Then a second later he said it's not true. But my point is that it's like, how do you explain the two different, it's not just the president, the whole administration, two different people, two different administrations at the same time?
Well, I think the first part of the answer has to be his own diminished faculties. And I think he obviously on that first visit, I thought it was a little too headline grabbing. I thought that it maybe been a bit premature, but I understood that it was important to Israelis, and he did not come alone. He brought gifts, and they were important military gifts. And I think the bear hug, the awkward bear hug with Netanyahu, nonetheless, it was that we're in this together despite our long history of hating each other as individuals. And so I think that was important. But I quickly came to believe that he was backtracking. And I believe there are two elements to the backtrack. One is, I think, the historic dislike of Israel by many in the State Department, which, as you well know, Ariel, has been a long time problem between that diplomatic corps and Israel. And Israelis certainly know it. Certainly the Israeli ambassador corps knows it. They've run into it a number of times. I've spoken to David Friedman, the former American ambassador, and he told me horrifying stories about what he first encountered, not at the top necessarily of the State Department, but several rungs down, about that the Trump administration would have a different relationship with Israel than the Obama administration, and that was clear, and it was a fight. So it was the bureaucrats who have dug in many ways. And it's not to be underestimated, their power. But then the second thing that happened with Joe Biden, I believe, was, well, I'll say there were three things. The second thing was world opinion, which he, I believe, gives too much import to. But the usual suspects who are always looking to gang up on Israel began to undermine some of that support as October came into November and the invasion started and blah, blah, blah. I think the world opinion began to speak up against Israel. Oh, the poor Palestinians. Yeah, we can all feel sorry, but let's not forget how this started and why the Hamas is hiding where it's hiding. And then the third thing I would say about Biden, of course, is the presidential election. And you have now an enormous number of Muslim American voters in the United States. I mean, it may be 1.5 million, 2 million, but they are concentrated primarily in city areas, but in the upper Midwest, especially.
Michigan,
and
right?
So Michigan, Minnesota. I mean, look at the two states that gave us Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib,
Yeah.
right? Those were the first two members, and look at how they turned. I mean, they're anti-Semites.
Yes,
they're open anti-Semites, and they've been elected and re-elected. So that tells you something about the constituency there, and because this is Michigan, especially as a swing state, Biden, I believe, has cowered in front of their criticism. So you add those three things: the historic problems with the State Department, the Muslim American voters, and the world opinion, and I think you see, as you said, like two different presidents.
Michael, do you think the Muslim voters won't vote for Trump? He's scared they'll stay home, basically, or vote for third party? That's the fear by him?
Yeah, I think it's more that he's afraid they'll stay home. Kennedy maybe, but
Kennedy's pro-Israel compared to Biden. So
that's right. So
maybe Cornel West or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think they're more concerned they'll stay home. And don't forget, many of these are young. Many of these voters are young voters, college students, college educated. And so in the sense, there's a lot, Biden has a problem with that whole demographic of young voters, even the college educated. So, that's where I think the Muslim American vote picks up more power than it actually has, because it's part of the cohort that he's having problem with.
Right. Michael, I have two more questions. Number one, we've seen in the past few, I'm not sure when we'll put this episode up, but in the past few weeks, Trump getting convicted in New York, where you are, and Hunter Biden, President Biden's son, I don't want to predict, but I assume by the time the episode comes up, what happened with him. It seems to me that if he's not convicted, the jury is so tainted, it's like unbelievable, because it's so obvious. He admits to it in his book that he did what he did, basically. And I think the second thing, which I think is like unbelievable, is the fact that in Biden's case, the Biden family seems to be the most disgusting, like just dirty people. Like the fact that he's sleeping with his brother's widow, and then it turns out in the case that she's going to testify that they took crack together, and the widow of his husband. It's just like you hold your head. And he said that the president said that he admires his son and he's the best person he ever met. And it's
smartest man.
Yeah, smartest man. This is the smartest man. So, and he has a baby with a stripper. He refuses to give her his last name. It's a very interesting story. My question is, how do you think the fact that this sham trial, I think it's even lefties will say it's a sham trial of Trump. Why will it affect the presidential election, do you think? Or will it actually have an opposite effect, that people will see how he's persecuted and feel like they need to support him?
Well, there's a third option, and I think we may be seeing that, which is that it's not really having any effect, right? It's sort of the people who say, "Aha, we got them," are matched by the people who say, damn you, I'm going to support him now. I'm going to give him money now. Right now, it seems to be a tie, more or less. So it may not be dispositive at the end of the day in terms of who wins the election. In terms of the Biden family, I think of them as the Biden crime family. I mean, I'm a big believer that the laptop really was the key to the kingdom, and that it showed everything that it showed in terms of Hunter's business dealings. It showed Joe's involvement. And I've spoken to Tony Bobulinski, and there's no question in my mind that this was a corrupt enterprise, that Joe Biden was in on it, that Joe Biden, and the timing is important. I think it's very unlikely that Joe Biden got significant money from the family business while he was vice president. I do believe that he helped arrange many of the business deals while he was vice president. He sanctified them by showing up at the dinners, getting in on the phone calls. He didn't have to say, hey, let's make a deal.
Right.
Hunter was selling Joe Biden as access. When he gets Joe Biden on the phone during that sales pitch, Joe Biden doesn't have to say anything other than hello. Great to meet you all. Hope to see you soon.
Right.
Good luck. Right.
Here's the vice president. Yeah.
That's enough. That's enough to say I'm in. Right. He's confirmed what Hunter has just sold. And the Bobulinski story, I think, is precious for many reasons, but most specifically, it is about this deal with the Chinese energy company. And they really thought they were going to make billions and billions of dollars of this. Essentially, they were going to arrange meetings with American elected officials, mayors, governors, Congress, etc., so the Chinese could buy American infrastructure. And much as they've been doing around the world, this was part of the Belt and Roads campaign, but that they would buy, say, the water system in New York City, pay New York City a ton of money, and then get monthly royalties or whatever. And the Bidens were making the deals, and they were going to get a cut of the proceeds. And so when Bobulinski meets Joe Biden in May of 2017, Joe Biden is a private citizen at that point, has just left the White House in January of 17, and he's going to get a 10% cut of this money. This is for introductions and other work that the Bidens did when Joe was vice president. So he sets it up while he's vice president. He authorizes it. He participates in it, but he doesn't get the money until he leaves office. That was the plan. And it got blown up. That for some reason that deal went south because of the Chinese government. And Bobulinski has said to me that he believes the Biden family was targeted, not for business purposes. He believes it was a Chinese intelligence operation, and that they were able to get the vice president of the United States.
That's amazing. And also we should say that at the same time that basically all this is almost out in the open, the justice system is prosecuting Trump for paying a porn star that either he did or he didn't sleep with 20 years ago, and then paying her off before he became president the first time. And the feds didn't want to bring it, and the New York person brought it, and they can't explain the underlying crime, and everything's convoluted, but the whole facts are on the table with a lot of this Biden stuff, and they're only getting his son for the gun charge, not for the main stuff. It's very, very weird. And I think it does show that when you have like a sort of a political justice system, it makes everyone less, I think, put any stock into the justice system, and that's a problem. I want to ask you about New York City, because that's where you are, and my father's side lives in New York, and we went to visit New York like 2 years ago, and right after COVID or a little bit after COVID, and the city was disgusting. I mean, in terms of just the amount of homeless people all over the place, the smell of urine in Manhattan, like very upscale neighborhoods. How do you, you explained before that a lot of it has to do with the politicians who came in, the more progressives that took over the Democrat Party. But why is it that progressives are promoting policies that are making everything dirty, disgusting, more dangerous? The subway was scary, to be frank. It was scary to get on the subway. So what is going on?
I think one way to look at it is reality has met just sort of a theoretical argument, right? That if you take the cops away, if you open the prisons, those are the problems, and so the problems will be solved, and people will be good and kind. Maybe we have to give them some more money, and I mean, it's ridiculous. It's all ridiculous. I interviewed Trump right after that verdict, and he said some interesting things. He has a way of putting things sometimes that sort of cuts through the noise. And he said, the Democrats, I don't understand. I mean, he seemed really baffled. Why would you want open borders? Who would want that? Who would fight to have men on girls' sports teams?
Yeah.
Whose idea is that, right? And so you go down through all these Democrat things, take away the cops, who would want these things?
Bail, cash bail, right? There's this big thing where they're letting people out after crimes.
Right. But we see now that all of that unused prosecution power has been flipped on its head. Now it's being used against the other party.
Yes.
And so when you read the New York Times virtually every day now, they have a story of how Trump, if he's president, could weaponize the Justice Department. Oh my God, really? Really? Whoever thought of doing that? Yeah. This is a guy who's being prosecuted with 4 criminal cases by Democrats and 2 civil cases by Democrats. And they're worried that he's going to weaponize the Justice Department. I think it's been weaponized. I think he's, as I said in the column, he's an amateur. They're the pros.
Yeah. And the thing is that when he was running, they always said lock her up about Hillary. But then he came in and he didn't do anything to her. So it's like, and that was something that she did right before the election. And here it's something that he did 8 years ago at least. And the actual affair, if it happened or not, it happened 20 something years. It's very, very, like you said, he's an amateur compared to them. Just on that point, before we finish, do you think that is one of the reasons why in the polls a lot of black men, I think, are moving towards Trump, because they feel that they're not getting basic things that they expect in a city like New York?
I think that's clearly a motive. This is such an unusual election, and Israel has had something like this over the years, where you've had candidates running against each other several times or whatever. This is unusual in the sense that you had Trump as president for 4 years, Biden defeats him. Now we've had Biden as president. And so you can really compare their records. And I saw a statistic the other day done by one of the far left media outlets, ABC, I believe it was, that said that in their poll, 43% said they were better off under Trump as president, and only 16% said they were better off under Biden. So that's the kind of comparisons you get. I was in an Uber car the other day, and the driver, I didn't bring up politics, he did, and he was telling me how much I paid for gas under Trump versus what I'm paying double now under Biden. I've been waiting to get a subsidized house for 8 years, but the migrants are now getting them before I do. Said every driver I know is voting for Trump. This is New York City. So something's happened with the quality of life, the cost of living, that is a real issue for people. And they converge in sometimes on this migrant issue, because the migrants are getting, so much charity, so much government assistance. And a lot of people here are feeling very in straight times themselves financially. And they see that they're not necessarily anti-immigrant or even anti-illegal immigrant, but they are they believe that there should be a system of fairness, and they see that being violated by the Democrats.
But also that when you say anti-immigrant, we have to just put in that it's not anti-immigrant, it's anti-illegal immigrant.
Yes.
So like my mother was an immigrant to the U.S. She did it the right way, and it took her years, green card, and then she had to pass all these tests, and they checked her, and they, it was tons of paperwork, and we can talk about if it's the right way to do it, but the point is that she did it the legal way, and you have
Yes.
people coming and getting hotels in New York, and
Yes.
obviously it's a very
Well, and the numbers, I just wrote the other day that the numbers, so there have been over 10 million under Biden in these last 3 years, over 10 million. And 10 million is roughly the number that came into the United States between 1860 and 1890. More came, around the turn of the century. But in that 30-year period, you had 10 million. Here we have 10 million in 3 years. Those were more vetted than these are. And the country was less populated. There was lots of room, lots of space to go in the West, in the Midwest, where many of them went. But now it's a whole different thing now, and it makes no sense. It makes no sense that they are completely unvetted.
Yeah, Michael Goodwin, I want to say that it was very interesting talking to you, and I feel like I'm talking with someone who I know for many, many years now, because I almost religiously, we used to read your stuff in the house whenever it would come out. We get the Post in the morning, pick it up, read it with the coffee. So it's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you, and thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ariel.